everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore here with Kyle Buller. How are you doing today, Kyle?
Good, Joe. It's pretty nice outside today. Nice, warm fall day.
Yeah. We just did a small train ride from Durango to Silverton. Really beautiful, through some beautiful mountain canyons, a lot of foliage.
Nice.
Really beautiful rivers, like the light blue kind of mineral coloration. It's great.
Aspens popping.
Oh yeah. We've been in it for weeks. It's really cool how long it lasts. Cool. So I guess before we kick off this episode, let's just give a quick shout out to the philosophy class that we're running. Do you have the date that class starts?
It kicks off October 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern time, so it's a Wednesday night. This class is going to be a 15-week live course. There's some breaks around the holidays, I believe, and you can check that out. We'll get those dates up on the website and link you to it. But yeah, I'm excited about it. It's going to be a deep dive into philosophy and hopefully kind of laying the foundation on understanding why philosophy is important for psychedelics.
Oh, yeah. Well, you will no doubt have that once you're through this 15-week program. You'll have a kind of grasp on the trajectory of Western philosophy and hopefully have a grasp on Alfred North Whitehead, who Terence McKenna said is the most psychedelic of the philosophers. So, Lenny's been studying him for ages. So you get to study with Lenny Gibson and us, and it's going to be great. This is a beta run trial, very limited seats. I think only 10 to 15 seats total for the public. Mm-hmm. And we've sold a bunch already. So check it out. It's on a pre-sale because it's beta. $200, I believe, is the price. So go check it out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And yeah, I guess big news for you, Kyle. You are pretty much ready to kick off your therapy practice. You got a supervisor now.
Yeah.
And you're just about to get into the game, which is excellent. New Jersey took its sweet time for you.
Yep. It's been a frustrating process, but we're here finally. And part of it was also delayed due to COVID and kind of getting distracted by this project. So yeah. But yeah, I'm excited to be here finally and got all that stuff approved and ready to rock and roll.
Cool. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that more on the show in the future. So stay tuned to everybody on that. Yeah, if you want to help us out, you can check out how to give us a review on your podcasting app or on Facebook or Google. Anything helps. Thanks a ton ahead of time. And you can always leave us a small monthly donation at Patreon, patreon.com/psychedelics today. All right. I think that's good enough for now. So the first thing I want to jump into is kind of a correction of sorts on a big topic we talked about last week. So last week we talked a lot about the stuff happening in Oregon with psilocybin therapy legalization, the drug decriminalization bill, Dr. Bronner's magic soap, like support from David Bronner, and a bunch more stuff. So somebody reached out and I think we realized there were some mistakes like right before the episode came out, and we wanted to correct some of that. So something that I heard through the grapevine, I won't name names, but I heard and repeated multiple times that the Oregon Drug Decriminalization Act was a all drug decriminalization bill, and that is not the case. It decriminalizes possession level for some people. The language is really interesting at times. So the things that have been changed are MDMA, methamphetamine, heroin, methadone, peyote, psilocybin and psilocin, LSD, and oxycodone. So those are the drugs that are listed in the bill explicitly, which is pretty interesting. And essentially what it does is moves these things from criminal offenses, I think Class A or Class B criminal situations, to like Class E, which really only gets a $100 fine. There's a lot more language in there. There's a lot more nuance, but I wanted to correct that first and foremost, that it's not the bill I thought it was. I still am in support of it after reading the whole thing, though I don't live in Oregon, so don't really have too much of a say, but some of you do. And, think about it. Like, this essentially lowers the amount of sentencing at times that people will get from possession and will fund treatment. So there will be a fair amount of more treatment centers available. The addiction levels in Oregon that they report are pretty extreme. It's like 1 in 7, 1 in 10 Oregonians having addiction problems, and there's often just not an available seat in a treatment center. If somebody wanted to go, they have to get put on a wait list, and they might not survive long enough to get in there, or a lot of other things. So that's an interesting one. I think David Bronner is supporting this one, and he's also in support of the Oregon psilocybin initiative, where they're hoping to have legal psilocybin therapy available in a few years if it passes as a measure. And so there's been a kerfuffle, and we talked about it a little bit in the last one. And I want to kind of correct the timeline because it adds a little bit of context to the story. So I think there was some behind the scenes stuff that we don't really know about yet. And I'm sure you could read plenty of that if you read what Decriminalized Nature published in their 80 pages of emails that they just outed. Not a really polite move. That's what happened first, was Decriminalized Nature publishing 80 pages of emails.
Wow.
And David Bronner emailed privately Larry and Carlos to say he isn't going to support them financially anymore for a few reasons. And that was a private email. Decriminalized Nature published that directly to their social media platform. David Bronner was still going to support local initiatives. So, kind of weird. And then as soon as they published that email from David, they started coming out against the psilocybin initiative plus the decriminalization called the Drug Addiction Treatment and Recovery Act. So complicated. And I just wanted to put that out there. What does this mean? I don't know exactly. I think there's some complicated things happening in the decriminalized nature world that I'm not privy to. My personal ethos, Kyle, is like I'm against prohibition.
Yep.
And what I've seen from decriminalized nature often is that they're pro-prohibition, generally speaking. Like, yes, they want to decriminalize psychedelic plants, but they are very in support of keeping other drugs illegal.
Right.
Their rhetoric, not just in their bills, like just their social media discussions with me, some of their communications I've seen online are kind of like explicitly for prohibition, it seems like to me. So that can be a problem. Maybe that's the right thing. I personally lean the other way towards like full decriminalization a la Portugal, though I understand America is a difficult place to be with a lot of that. An important thing to point out about these two bills, Measure 110 and the psilocybin initiative, doesn't look like they make allowances for home grows. And at times even, it looks like if mushrooms are growing naturally on your yard, which happens regularly in the Northwest, like you could still get in trouble. Like, I'm not going to say that this is a change. Like, I think you can still get in trouble for that now.
That's ridiculous.
It's just not as far as we wanted it to go, right? That's kind of where I sit. Like, okay, great. Like, it's getting us kind of in the direction I want to see this thing go, but it's not perfect. It's still, both of these are still, in my opinion, a lot better than, where they stand now.
Totally.
The laws stand now. Yeah. Like, accountability for therapists who are doing this work is huge. Like, the amount of like horrible abuse I hear about regularly in the underground world is not okay. And this would help us correct that, because you can go to the licensing board and, it's legal and above board. So, you have accountability now, as opposed to just being in the black market and getting, touched on or abused. Like, because I'm sure that kind of stuff's going to happen too.
Not maybe knowing where to reach out for help when that does happen.
Right. So I apologize if the last Friday episode was a little misleading. I think we corrected all the points that were brought to my attention. And yeah, these bills are out there if you want to read them. They're available on the internet. No problem. You can check out the bill. You can interact with the team probably too. So, if you're interested, I'm sure you can do that. Yeah. So it's a really complicated thing. Like, I don't really know how to feel about this, like all plants versus a single plant, like Denver with just mushrooms, or
right.
Like, this gentleman's been reaching out to me that wants to do this at the state level, but just with mushrooms. Where I'm like, that's cool, but like, what about everything else? And what about all these political prisoners that we're putting away? And, the intergenerational trauma we're creating through our tax dollars and policies. It's like, I just don't understand how to balance these two things. Like, I want to do it all at once, but I know that's not necessarily possible. Complicated math, but I think we'll get there eventually. We just got to stay on this.
Right. I was going to say, like, is it easier to focus on one single plant or molecule versus trying to encompass everything? And maybe that's why people are focusing on one individual thing. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that are, being harmed, being put away, and, need treatment. And I just even think about like the opioid epidemic and just thinking if it was decriminalized and treatment was available and drug testing was available, like how many less deaths would we see? I mean,
a lot less.
Kind of thinking about the folks that have passed in my town. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. I think mostly every funeral I've been to from like people in my age group, it was all from an overdose, accidental overdose, And it's like, what if they knew about drug testing? What if they were able to like go test their thing to see if there was like traces of fentanyl in it, and the education was out there that kind of destigmatized that, you could save a life, I think. And so
100%, like free naloxone. Naloxone's way cheaper than picking up a dead body. And, training people how to use it, how to use safely. It's like, don't use alone. Like if you're going to inject, like make sure there's someone there with you, all this kind of stuff. And then, when we see cannabis legalized, we see opiate addiction and death rates drop a bunch. It's not, it's still like, I think multiple digit percentage decrease, but it's, I don't think it's like 50% reduction, but it's still a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, stuff to consider. And, an observation I made, Kyle, about the difference between decriminalized nature and some of these other things is that decriminalized nature is coming at this from an approach of our access to plants as an inalienable right.
Right.
Versus the Oregon, Measure 110 saying we should fund treatment better and sentence people to prison less. So there's very different talk tracks coming from very different places.
Right.
And the psilocybin initiatives, like, we've got enough data. Let's just make therapy happen now.
Yeah.
So very different landscapes and saying very different things. So, we just got to understand where people are coming from when we're having these conversations. It's kind of a good angle into this next story about Zuckerberg. So the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative Advocacy. So it sounds a little awkward, but I imagine it's the Zuckerberg Foundation donated a $500K lump sum, I think, $500K into a Measure 110 initiative that would decriminalize drug possession. So what we've been talking about with Measure 110. So that's amazing that that's happening. And I am really excited that some really big players are supporting that. I don't really understand how I think he's in California, like most of these tech folks, is able to donate to a state ballot initiative. I think same thing with Bronner. Like apparently the laws in Oregon are loose enough where they can do that, which is interesting. But I'm just kind of happy to, right. So living over state lines and donating is kind of the thing. Like that's really interesting. Yeah. And go ahead.
I was going to say, what was your impression when you first saw that news? I remember seeing, I think, psychedelic.support. I saw it on their Instagram story. I was like, whoa, I thought it was possibly a joke. I didn't think it was actually a real thing when I first saw it. And I had to look it up and be like, wow, okay, that just happened. And I wonder what Zuckerberg's like, I guess. I don't know what his agenda is there. Interesting. I mean, I guess here in the one article, his campaign manager quoted, "People with addiction need help, not punishment. And we're excited so many people are stepping forward to help win a more humane, equitable, and effective approach to drug addiction in Oregon. Now's our moment to stop ruining lives and start saving them."
Cool.
So that was from Peter Zuckerman. That was quoted on Marijuana Moment.
It's my reaction was awesome. Like, great. I'm glad big people are supporting this. People with way too much money and what I'm noticing is that there's like resistance at like all levels of culture to the way we've been doing things. And people are starting to see that, oh, look, these people are out there doing this work. That means we can change culture for the better. I'm sure Robert Forte would have an interesting spin on this. It'd be like, okay, this is the the way we do the Brave New World. By getting these, plutocrats to influence things like this. But, like prison's not the right place to be, and people need treatment. And that's what he's going for. So, I'm going to take it on its face and say, like, great. He doesn't really have too much of a say in this. He donated money. The thing can't change anymore. It's already a measure that people are going to be voting on next month. So, I'm just overall stoked about it. Little goofy that there's, I've seen minimal resistance to this from like organized groups. Like I think the Psilocybin Initiative, the Oregon Psychiatric Association's against it, which, might just mean, oh, cool, good, let's go forward. Because, they're, I hate to sound too cynical, but feels to me like they're essentially just an arm of a drug lobbying group. But, I don't want to like shit too hard on psychiatry in general, but often it's simply drugs. It's not like a integrative psychiatry practice a la like Dan Engel, like many of these other integrative psychiatrists who want to focus on the full picture of the body, like nutrition, exercise, like culture, and then, add drugs in when necessary. It's like drugs aren't the devil. These psych meds aren't the devil. It's just a tool. But like when overused, like you can use a hammer too much. You use a skill saw too much. Like you can use psych meds too much. When you could,
I think
go ahead.
I think some of their argument was that they were upset that, the folks at Measure 109 didn't reach out to, the psychiatrist there or the psychiatry board because, they made a comment that if psilocybin becomes an FDA approved drug, then, you haven't, brought in medical experts here. Like, you're not like creating the structure where, psychiatrists are going to be able to, I guess, administer these drugs. I think I remember reading that. Like it was more along the lines of like who has the prescribing rights, and it seems kind of a little wacky that, maybe they didn't include that or reached out for them for insight. I'll find that article I stumbled across last week or 2 weeks ago, and we'll put it in the show notes about the opposition there.
Yeah, I think that's important to check out. And yeah, it makes sense. Like, why wouldn't you hit up the psychiatry group for feedback? If you just assume they're going to push against you and not play a part, like, yeah, it's probably just better to know ahead of time. But whatever, it's kind of too late. If that's the only opposition, like, I don't necessarily think it's going to fly. I know Decrim Portland or Decrim Oregon's kind of against it too, but I don't necessarily think they've got enough momentum to fight it. But we'll see. It's coming up quick, just a few more weeks.
It is. Yeah. I feel like this is going to be a big year for psychedelics, with these measures being, voted on, and then also more states voting for legalization. Mm-hmm. Feels like we have a lot of, hopefully, solid forward movement. And just even to consider what happened in 2020 so far with and 2019 with the, decriminalization efforts.
Right.
I mean, things are moving quickly.
You say legalization. I'm just going to read one headline before we jump to New Jersey. So Governor of Hawaii legalizes sale of edible products by licensed medical cannabis dispensaries. It's coming from a Normal article. And this next one also from Normal, New Jersey. Voters support solidly in favor of marijuana legalization ahead of ballot initiative vote. I didn't get a chance to read this one yet, Kyle, but what did you pick up when you read it?
Just that around 65% of New Jerseyans will probably vote yes on that ballot question. So,
yeah.
It's been a long time coming. I mean, Governor Murphy said that he would legalize marijuana the first 100 days of his in office, and that just did not happen. And so I think a lot of people are really frustrated in the state about it that do agree with legalization. And it just sounds like there's just been a lot of infighting in Trenton about ways forward. As I've been following the news throughout the past few years, it's just been like a headache. So I'm glad that it's on the ballot this year, but I mean, I know that they were trying to pass it in-house and it just kept falling through. Just like people couldn't get their terms right, and just a lot of disagreement there.
Yeah, it's pretty common when this stuff's coming to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for like adult recreational use. You already have medical there, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So at the bottom of the article, it says Jersey is one of 4 states where voters will decide on legalization initiatives in November. Voters in Arizona, Montana, and South Dakota will decide on similar measures. And voters in Mississippi and South Dakota will vote on ballot proposals around medical use. So
Sweet.
that's good too. Yeah, more states. It's coming. Taking its time, but it's getting there.
It's slowly getting there. Yep.
Cool. Next article here from Westward. It's a Denver publication. Title. This is a tough one. Denver mushroom dealer pleads guilty in federal court. So Denver decriminalized possession of mushrooms way back. It was a year or two ago. And
May 2019.
Just a little over a year then, year and a half. And this gentleman, Cole Milner, got busted because he was doing a lot of like journalism stuff. And he had been growing for a while. He kind of wasn't careful enough when talking to journalists. And the DEA was able to track him. And they put him in a tough spot. They found a whole bunch of mushrooms at his house. A little over 20 ounces of dried mushrooms. I love that they counted the amount of live mushrooms. They found 906 live mushrooms.
Wow.
So it's still growing. It's pretty good. It's a good sized grow. And yeah, he essentially pleaded guilty to whatever they were charging him with. Like, I think it was intent to distribute. And you can kind of read that in the Westward article. It's worth knowing that there's people out there, there's like narcotics agents, like trying to make these busts. And it's often in partnership with local PD. So they actually used an undercover cop, Jessica De La Roe, I think is how you would pronounce that, to do some sting buys from him.
Mm.
And, after a few sting buys, you can't really doubt it in court anymore. And yeah, so he is not sentenced yet. He just pled guilty. I think he'll get a sentence in
6
December.
months, I believe, too.
Okay. 6 months is what they're estimating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They said let's see. Kolner appeared in U.S. District Court of Colorado on September 28th to enter a guilty plea after striking an agreement with the federal prosecutors who are recommending Milner to be sentenced to only 6 months in prison. Based on federal sentencing guidelines, Milner had been looking at 10 to 16 months in prison. So,
Okay, so they are trying to go a little easy on him, which is good. But, just a warning, people, like this is, as we see things decriminalized, it's not necessarily the case that you're safe.
Mm-hmm.
You can still go to prison, and it's not a nice place. So, be careful. Please be careful. I'm lucky enough to be blessed with extreme paranoia. So, cuts both ways. So just, consider it. Consider what a healthy level of paranoia is for your situation and what you're up to. And just err on the side of caution. I think the law, the special saying is only break one law at a time. Like, don't carry 20 different kinds of drugs when you're driving across the country. Right. If you need to carry any, which you should question if you actually need to, maybe just carry one in very small amounts. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. And we don't want to see you go to jail.
Yeah, just get familiar, with your local laws. As for this, right? Like, you're allowed to grow in Denver, you're allowed to possess in Denver, but you're not allowed to distribute. And so that's what it sounds like he's getting charged for is criminal possession with intent to distribute. So, just being aware, right? Because people are like, oh, it's decriminalized. I can kind of do whatever I want, or I'll set up my practice. And it's like, well, not really. I mean, unless your risk tolerance is really high and that's what you want to do. I mean, all for whatever people want to do, but just note what the law says, so you know how to make those informed decisions and kind of do your own risk analysis there.
It's an interesting point that the feds aren't going after possession. Like, I think maybe the feds just aren't interested in possession charges. They only want like the intent to distribute and the distribution charges.
Yeah.
Possession's probably a little too basic for feds. So just maybe even talk to a lawyer. Like, if you can't find Saul Goodman, I think you can find somebody who's like a decent criminal lawyer, criminal attorney, and understand your risks. Like, it's harm reduction. It's really important, and it's really important for the movement for you not to go to jail.
Yeah.
All right. So next up is this really exciting THC article, essentially suggesting that THC is hitting the 5-HT2A receptor site. I think 5-HT2R.
Which I think is just receptor. Yeah.
Okay, short for, okay. Yeah. And typically 5-HT2A is associated with psychedelic experiences. And I think they're suggesting that in the future, they might be able to develop a particular type of cannabis-based 5-HT2A, like agonist or antagonist to do this. What was your takeaway here?
Yeah, it sounds like in some preclinical findings, they're finding that there might be some binding there with the 5-HT2A with cannabis, which I find to be really interesting. And so, yeah, I guess we could read a little bit here, the interaction between THC and the 5-HT2A. This is on psychedelicreview.com. Much cannabis research is focused on its interactions of the body's cannabinoid system, which are members of the G protein coupled receptor family. However, a 2018 preclinical study set out to explore how THC behaves at the 5-HT2A receptors. The study, which carried out on mice, tested the effects of chronic THC exposure on the 5-HT2A receptors in cortical regions of the brain. The researchers found that long-term exposure to THC sensitized 5-HT2A receptors triggered a psychosis-type alteration in their signaling mechanism. These findings suggest that THC's binding with the 5-HT2A receptors leads to the overactivation of the pro-hallucinogenic signaling pathways. This functional alteration of the receptor may lead to an increase in susceptibility of psychotic states, schizophrenic-type responses, and hallucinations. Other research also indicates that an increased density in the functional conformation of the 5-HT2A receptors has been found in schizophrenic patients' brains. So, yeah, I don't know. This is really interesting. Down here at the end of the article, they're talking about like what are the implications, and they say that the implications of this research are significant for cannabis therapy, and cannabis may hold immense potential as a therapeutic agent, but memory impairment and cognitive impairment often inhibits its use. So, yeah, I think it kind of comes back to what we were chatting about 2 weeks ago at this point, maybe 3 weeks ago, about the cannabis being, kind of psychedelic and its potential in therapy. And, just kind of thinking about it binding to the 5-HT2A. I mean, I guess that could be a hypothesis that it does have psychedelic quality, since I guess colloquially, people suggest that the 5-HT2A receptor is kind of like the psychedelic receptor site. So it's all interesting. I think I just came across another article I saw somewhere about cannabis as a psychedelic. I'm going to have to pull it up. I think it was more of a research study.
Yeah. It's about time we look at this. It's available. There's plenty of it. Pharma doesn't need to manufacture cannabis. It's relatively cheap per dose. Yeah, I just think it's about time we look at that. So you're looking for one that was actually done at like a university scenario, Kyle?
Just saw a little abstract on psychedelic.support Instagram a little bit earlier, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I didn't get to look it up though before we got on here.
I'm sure people are doing like internal kind of like proprietary research, because there's, plenty of groups looking at this stuff and doing this now. For a little while, it was only like Daniel McQueen and Innate Path, but now there's a lot more people doing this.
Right.
So I imagine people are keeping data and moving things forward.
Yeah, I haven't read this, so maybe you can go look at it. But the journal article is called Cannabis as Entheogen, Survey and Interview Data on the Spiritual Use of Cannabis. And
we had one of our writers do a piece on this as well.
Yeah. And this
so you can also check out our blog.
This was released in the Journal of Cannabis Research, and it was published on September 22nd, 2020. And the background in the abstract here, while cannabis has a long history of spiritual use, its normalization in Western societies during the last decade has led to more recreational use. The study aimed to explore the characteristic of spiritual cannabis use as compared to recreational use and the use of psychedelics such as LSD and psilocybin. So, yeah, definitely check that out. I'm going to probably skim through it a little bit later.
Cool. So next up, we've been seeing some interesting activity in the corporate sector. And, one of the better ones that I read was that, first off, the site article's title is University of Toronto and Sincero Life Sciences join forces to study psychedelic medications. And this is from The Growth Op, thegrowthop.com. And they're looking to make psilocybin-based medications accessible to people who could benefit from potentially life-changing effects of psilocybin. So this includes non-psychedelic compounds that are similar structurally, and also microdosing, from what I read in the article, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Because, as we've discussed many times, there's a lot of people who are just not in an okay position to have a hardcore psychedelic session. And it's exciting to see that universities in Canada are jumping in too, because we've seen like 3 to 5 US sites. There's 1 to 2 European sites now, or university affiliated now. I think this is the first Canadian one I've seen.
Toronto seems like a hotspot for psychedelics all of a sudden, thinking about like the multiple psychedelic companies out of there.
Right.
Really fascinating.
Toronto's a really cool place. I love Toronto. I would love to spend more time there, and seems like it might be going that way if we've got university stuff and conferences like Mapping the Mind that just happened and more. So
yeah,
I don't know if you saw this, but they recorded the panel I moderated for Mapping the Mind and put it on YouTube for free.
Nice.
Yeah. So I got it on, I think, our Instagram or something. But check it out if anybody wants to check that out. It was about integration developments and integration techniques. Might not have gone as perfectly as I wanted, but it was still interesting. I think a woman from Compass was there. A therapist from Compass was on the board. Therapist. She was a PhD psychologist.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. Even Lauren Taus. That was the first time I got to chat with her.
And Deanna Rogers too, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So it's cool to like know people going in.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's not too much more depth on this Toronto and Sincero topic.
Yeah, it sounds like they're just, trying to create a product that provides a therapeutic benefit of psilocybin without psychoactive effects of a flood dose. And just trying to focus on pharmaceuticals that include minimal effective dose.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So, it sounds like a lot of people are trying to enter into that microdosing space. And, if it's helpful, it's helpful. I was just actually having a conversation with somebody the other day about placebo effect. And I wonder why, we criticize things that have a placebo effect.
Right.
And say, well, it's just placebo. And I don't know, I guess it kind of comes down to like cosmology or metaphysics. And it's just thinking like, well, if it works, it works. Why? And I guess you can't quantify placebo because it affects everybody differently, right? But if it works for somebody, it works for somebody. And why should we maybe like devalue the placebo effect at times? The brain is a very powerful thing. Mind is very powerful, and I don't know.
Andrew Weil used to talk about this a lot. Like, why aren't we spending a ton of money studying placebo and how to like introduce it more, like and use it more medically, more often? It is used medically. It's just not perhaps as much as it could be.
Right.
Yeah. So since we're not developing too many more great drugs all the time, like perhaps it's time to really start digging into that.
Yeah. And it reminds me, I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast or if I was just talking to somebody else about it. This idea kind of stuck out in like the narrative therapy realm. This psychiatrist, Louis Madrona, talked about it in his book, Narrative Therapy. And he was just saying that like Tylenol can work really great for somebody, but sometimes if it's not in their story, Tylenol may not work. And kind of, I guess, taking that more like narrative approach to like, what really works for you. And, if that medicine is in your kind of narrative, right? Maybe your cosmology, your metaphysics, then, why not focus on that? And if it's not, then I don't know. But it was, it's just something interesting to think about. When maybe thinking about more like personalized medicine, it's like, what works for somebody, what doesn't work for somebody, and how can we really focus on that at times?
So another thing I wanted to put out was I was recording with Dr. Dan Engel, a psychiatrist, the other day, and he's really interested in microdosing and really in support of it. He thinks the huge amount of data that Fadiman and Korb were able to put together is, a substantial enough data set to say, like, here's this low risk intervention of microdosing that you might try. Like super low risk profile, good enough anecdotal report data set. And I thought that was interesting. It's got a lower risk profile than a lot of things. So perhaps it's something that we should try. But what I'm really excited about is that in the next year or two, we're going to have a lot more clinical data on this.
Right.
Doctors will be more comfortable with it. And, this story will keep progressing in really interesting ways that I don't really think we're understanding how this is going to look in a couple of years yet. It's going to be really just how much 2020's changed the movement. Like it's going to be really intense over the next couple of years. A lot of these new media companies are in place and, vertically integrated companies elsewhere. It's just a really interesting situation. Yeah. So next up, MindMed partnered with a group at NYU, the NYU Langone group, to launch a clinical training program focused on psychedelic assisted therapies. And so their MindMed is looking at LSD, 18MC, which is like the unpsychedelic, so like not psychedelic version of Ibogaine, maybe. And I think they all also looking at like hippie flipping or something, like mushroom, psilocybin and
MindMed was doing that, and then also the trip stopper. It sounded like from this article that the new center that they're funding, so MindMed's putting $5 million to establish this new center.
Is it 5 or 50?
On this one, it says $5 million. I'm on.
All right. Yeah, 50 sounds a little extreme.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. 5.
Yeah, so they're teaming up with NYU Langone to launch a clinical training program focused on psychedelic-assisted therapies. And so the Langone Health Psychedelic Medicine Research Training Program, that's what it's going to be called, or it's going to be established as a Center for Psychedelic Medicine at NYU Langone Health. It says that the new center will explore the use of drugs, including psilocybin-assisted therapy for alcohol use disorder and MindMed's ibogaine-derived molecule 18MC for opioid use disorders. So I'm not too sure if they'll be incorporating some of their other research that they're doing over in Switzerland. And I think they're doing that LSD, MDMA combo in Switzerland and some of their other stuff. So it sounds like this is more of kind of like a training program than maybe like their research hub.
Right. Yeah. So, it's a pretty good foothold, right? Like if you can't do it at Harvard or Princeton or Stanford, like NYU is pretty good. NYU is no slouch. And, they've been doing, MAPS trials there at NYU for a little bit. Or actually, no, it wasn't MAPS. They were doing their own jam, right? Like with psilocybin.
NYU, yeah.
So, I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to see they're spending on training. People will have more training available, especially in person at a place that's psychiatrist and therapist heavy like Manhattan. So I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have on this list of topics, Kyle. Or did we exhaust it already?
I guess in the the finance and business aspect, Field Trip Health Ltd. Just went public. So they're on the Canadian Stock Exchange, right? So if anybody's interested in that, I think they are finally publicly listed now.
Yeah, and I'm seeing Canadian numbers here. Oh, they went up a bunch since we talked last. 2.9 Canadian as of right now on Wednesday. And they opened at what? Previous close was 2.7. I think the lowest today was 2.25 Canadian. Yeah, internet issues, so I can't refresh, unfortunately. But really interesting that more and more companies are becoming publicly listed. I think I saw something like a Compass Pathways getting like $100 million valuation, or no, sorry, back up. I think it was $100 target. Like people are expecting the stock to go up to $100 a share, which is pretty interesting. So it's one group of analysts, so you never know. So just interesting. I think what we're going to see is a lot more mergers and acquisitions. Like, oh, somebody's got some really cool intellectual property. Like stuff will get traded around a lot more until we got these behemoths that might then get bought by somebody like Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer or something.
Right.
Yeah. Who knows? Like maybe they'll stay as their own thing for a while. Because this model is really different. Like if it's paired with therapy, this is not what Pfizer does usually.
Right. Yeah. It's not just selling a drug, right? It's really selling a therapeutic experience. And how do you scale that? And I mean, it's scalable, I think, but it's also might not be as scalable as like, say, just trying to push a drug out, right?
Right. SSRIs are very scalable.
Yeah. Yeah. Therapy is very personalized and takes a lot of time. And yeah, I mean, I guess you can create clinics and scale that. But I mean, I'm also worried just about like, if you're thinking just about scalability and, bringing in profits, how are you going to really maybe cut back on safety issues, right? And like the integrity and all that stuff with, the therapeutic part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's it's a tough thing. This is really new territory. We yes, there are traditional use cases, but those aren't necessarily going to translate to Americans or Westerners or even folks in China. Like there's a lot of problems out there. There's going to be a lot of PTSD coming, and we've got to be a little flexible on this stuff, and hopeful that we're going to do the right thing. And we can just, if you're disagreeing with somebody, just stay loud. Like if they like your idea, maybe they'll shift.
Right.
It's how many times have I yelled about Walmart in my past? Did they change? Not really. But, like at least the owners, the major shareholders, the Waltons are becoming more environmentally aware. So it's a good move. I don't know if I told you this. I was hanging out in some permaculture facility, like out near Aspen for like a permaculture, like a statewide permaculture conference years ago. And at a certain point, the owner of the ranch came out and was just chatting and shooting the shit. And he's like, the Waltons come out here for like week-long retreats and just like hang out and learn a lot just by talking to these high-end permaculture people. So they are getting educated at that end. It's just a matter like, is it enough to shift their behavior, and how can you manipulate this big corporate machine enough, as it's publicly traded, there's complicating factors there. So we can translate that over to our world of like how we can definitely influence things, and we can make better models happen sooner, I think, because it's pretty new territory still. Yeah. Like these big groups may come around and squash everybody, but how can you fight it?
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of like maybe a little off topic, but I think it's just the idea of change. And It's interesting, just chatting with a few friends recently, and they were talking about like how some of the towns that they lived in like kind of really transformed since like COVID. And they're like, wow, I really love that this street is shut down. There's like dining out on the street. Like, why? Like, I hope this sticks. And so my one friend was talking about like some changes in Burlington, and I was just in Princeton over the weekend, and just hearing some of my friends be like, oh yeah, like, I kind of like how things are a little bit more slowed down. People are out in the streets a little bit more, and like, wow, like, could we, convert some of these like roads that are typically, you drive on into kind of pedestrian streets and really kind of open up business that way, and slow down. And it's like, yeah, if we're starting to make these changes, could we stick with it? And just thinking about like different laws, like, I have a friend that owns a brewery, and before COVID, they were only allowed to have outdoor patios if for special events, and they were only allowed to have like X amount of events in a year. And, now they have like, I think their permanent outdoor patio because of COVID, right? And it's like these small little changes. It's like, how could we get that to stick if we kind of we're starting to appreciate some of those changes? And what does that look like if we continue to stick like that and don't go back to like maybe old ways of functioning? Be like, all right, well, COVID's done. We're going to open up the streets again and just dining inside. It's like, maybe people are liking kind of like this like European style, like just out in the streets, and kind of feels like it brings a little bit more community together at times.
I agree. Yeah. There's we had that in our town, Kyle, and so Breckenridge and Frisco had that. And I think it was really nice to just have the full, big, wide Main Street and a lot more outdoor dining. I felt like it was still a little risky here and there, COVID wise, but our numbers, even though we've had so much tourism, like it did okay. So
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if we see it again next summer here in Colorado. And I would hope it's a permanent thing eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, it is a lot nicer when we're walking. We're going at a more human speed, more human scale. So yeah, it's food for thought.
Yeah, just interesting to think about just in terms of change, like why need to go back to like a sense of normal all the time, right? Like, could we move forward? Like maybe this new, and it's just totally different, but just thinking like, oh, okay, if we're all appreciating how some of these towns have transformed, why do you want to go back to the same way, right? Like, could you continue that, post-COVID and lockdowns? And, I don't know what happens if you start to implement those changes over time. What could, your town look like, and start small that way?
I guess bringing it back to psychedelics, like we've seen a lot more people do telehealth ketamine sessions, sometimes ketamine telehealth group sessions. And we're going to have some interesting data that was kind of forced on us.
Right.
On account of the pandemic, like a lot of forced creativity.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Yeah. When we return, like, for instance, like I think some of the groups in California that don't necessarily like ketamine lozenges are using ketamine lozenges.
Right.
And, once they get, 400 cases under their belt, what does that look like long term? Is it more democratic to use lozenges than IM or IV? Perhaps the effect is just fine. So it's going to be some interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think if one thing that comes out of this is, as you said, kind of like forced creativity. We're like forced to make some of these changes, and what works, what doesn't work, and if things feel like they're working in a different way, how do you keep that, right? And just thinking about like coming back to like the integration aspect of experiences. Like if something feels like that is moving in a new direction, how do you continue to follow that without needing to just snap back to what has worked in the past? So yeah, I don't know, food for thought. And just, I just brought this up in terms of like business development and, just the way things are going. Things start to shift a little bit. Like, could we continue that change, or do we keep feeding a system that feels broken or just isn't helpful in our own evolution?
It's a really deep thought there. There's a lot to that. You could do that riff on that for hours, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like what is helpful for our evolution as a species and culture? I think there's some, this is going to sound crude and I'm going to say it anyway because this is not what I believe, but it's essentially in the subtext of a lot of discussions in the psychedelic world. So like, okay, how many people are killing themselves a day? Like, can your kind of grassroots, decriminalized locally, movements, can that affect the amount of numbers of people's lives that's required to substantially impact that?
Mm-hmm.
Is it 22 veteran suicides a day? Like, can we cut that in half through decriminalization initiatives? And I don't think the answer is yes. So like, what are the alternatives? Pharma at scale, doing what capital does, and, might not be pretty, but it might be able to save a lot of lives.
Right.
And, the decrim, people looking at that as like an evil, but it's like, what's more evil, that happening or all those people killing themselves because of what your tax dollars had them do?
Right.
And not to mention all the people that aren't even affiliated with the military suicides. So It's like a really ugly thing. It's like there's like your ideology might feel really pure, but there might be a lot of subtext there that you're missing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this stuff is so nuanced and, life isn't so simple. There's a lot of complexities here. And, as you're talking, I'm also wondering from a different perspective, like what's causing some mental health issues? What's causing some of this stuff? Maybe, I don't know, I haven't talked to too many vets, but maybe you have a different perspective on this, or any people that are in that field listening, just like, going away and then coming back and then maybe not feeling integrated into your society, having the supports. Does that lead to loneliness? If you come back, just thinking about like a rite of passage in a sense, going through this really intense experience and then coming back and still feeling outcasted from society. And it's like, well, how could you start to fix that aspect if that is, at part of one of the roots of that suffering? And just looking at like system theories, like how are the systems driving our mental health? And, do we start to fix that stuff instead of trying to just medicate our way out of it? So I'm always kind of looking at like those system theories too. It's like, well, yeah, we could fix it with medication, but also how is our behavior and the systems that we're in also affecting our mental health and our well-being, and the way that we function? And, you could continue to just keep running that like hamster wheel, right? And maybe that's the issue. How do you get off the hamster wheel? But everybody's telling you to be on it because that's the way things function. It's like, well, maybe there's another way. Maybe we don't need to be doing that.
Right. So, yeah, not only is there, when veterans come back, like there's legitimate PTSD, there's kind of like CTE style brain damage happening from like repeated micro concussions or like literal concussions. So there's like this combination of like non-organic psychiatric disorder and also like organically, is that the right way to phrase it? Organically inclined, like there's structural physical stuff happening.
When I think of like, organic and functional psychosis, right? So organic being like there is a root cause somewhere, you have a brain damage.
Right.
Yeah, something like that. Functional, it's like, well, we have all these theories, but what's really going on there?
Sure. So you have that, and then you come back to this culture that's not necessarily healthy anyway, really isolating, like amplifying loneliness. Plus you've got these psychiatric situations going that just compound it. And, that to me is what's going on. I think nature could do really great with a lot of people. I know that's not always possible, but I'd really love to see some sort of situation where folks could land after their time in the military and do a lot of outdoor time somewhere. Like maybe it's just farming for a couple of weeks, or maybe it's surfing for a couple of weeks or months. Like if they need to farm or surf for a couple of months, like that would be pretty not expensive to make happen. But I think there are people working on that, like the surfing one, definitely. The agriculture one, definitely. I've got some friends that love just, one of my buddies got out and he did a lot of time. And he did, I don't know if I told you this, he kayaked the Mississippi River
cool
to the ocean. It was like multiple weeks of kayaking with two other buddies. It's like, that's a pretty good way to land. Like you don't have to go in and like, sit in a cubicle yet. You're able to like, do your thing, explore, and, be a primate for a while.
Yeah.
Which I think is important.
Yeah. I think that's super important.
Yeah. Like, do we want to really deny our origins and like what we've evolved to kind of need and want? I don't think so, especially when someone's sick.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we slap in psychedelics and we can really help a lot. Like, organic structural things going on in the brain for sure. And then, healing the mind through psychedelics, not just the brain.
Yeah.
Which is really like, double whammy. So it's, we've got all these interventions. They're not super expensive. And that's maybe what's frustrating to a lot of these folks. Like, we can do all this with mushrooms. We don't need pharma.
Mm-hmm.
But, are you going to safely be able to help that many people? I don't think the answer is yes, but I understand why it's frustrating.
Right. Yeah, these complexities, right?
Totally.
Thinking about reaching a lot of people and then trying to act locally at times. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like it's good to just ask them and put them out there. Maybe somebody listening will come up with better answers.
Yeah, totally. Cool, man. We're at about an hour. You feeling good to wrap?
Yeah, I think we hit everything for this week. So, yeah.
Cool. All right, everybody. Really appreciate you listening. We couldn't do this without you. We do it for you. We do it for the world because we think that psychedelics, transpersonal psychology can really help. Perhaps not the answer, but I think it's a big answer.
One of the answers.
One of the answers. Yeah, totally. It's a multiple choice test.
Yeah.
And so thank you all for tuning in. If you want to help us out for free, leave us a review on your podcast app, Facebook, Google, wherever. We'd love it. It really helps a lot. Helps us get more guests. And if you want to help us financially, you can leave us a small monthly donation at patreon.com/psychedelics today. And if you want to help us even more, check out some of our classes, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. We've got some really great stuff there, from a course on Carl Jung and psychedelics called Imagination is Revelation, a pseudo, kind of a still explicitly Jungian course, Psychedelics in the Shadow, that you did with Ido Cohen, which is really cool. Navigating Psychedelics is always available. There's a clinician's version that's always available as well. So check that out. And maybe check out what we've got in our shop. We've got some t-shirts. Christmas time's coming up. Maybe you want to buy some people some gifts. And we've got some t-shirts, mugs, stickers, all sorts of fun stuff up there at psychedelicstodayshop.com. Yeah.
I also want to plug another course that's up there that we haven't talked about, but CJ Spotswood put together a CEU approved course for nurses called Psychedelics and Psychiatry. Let's go at your own pace. You can sign up. I think it's $25 for non-CE credits and then $35 for CEUs. If you're looking for that, if you're in the nursing field, check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. You can find all that and more, including some free classes. So check it out. And we're going to have some live dates available for the live supported edition of Navigating Psychedelics soon. Some early bird discounts. So stay tuned. And see you on the next episode on Tuesday. Have a great one, everybody. Thanks, Kyle. Bye-bye.
All right, take care, everybody.